Hello and welcome to Card Making 101, the complete beginner's guide to card making. This video is part one of a comprehensive series aimed at beginner paper crafters. Other videos in the series will take you through tutorials on things like die cutting, working with embossing folders, stamping, heat embossing, stenciling, colouring with alcohol pens and working with your gel plates, plus so much more. Today I'm going to be guiding you through choosing the perfect cardstock or paper for your projects. Now don't forget, of course, to check out the playlist with all the videos and of course subscribe to the CraftStash channel. It can be quite easy to become overwhelmed by the sheer choice of cardstocks and papers on the market for paper crafters. So I'm going to show you what to look for in your cardstock and paper, what suits which purposes, and the meaning of some of the terminology you may hear when looking for your cardstock too. So probably the most common sort of cardstock that you are going to be purchasing is your white cardstock. I've got two very different ones here. Obviously, they just look the same. So how do you know what you're actually purchasing, particularly when it is in a packet? So the first thing to work out is, what are you purchasing it for? Are you going to be stamping on it? Are you going to be die cutting it? Or are you going to be creating layers or card bases with it? So starting with the latter, card bases need to be a heavy weight. Okay, so this one is more like a heavyweight paper. This one is a cardstock. This one is around about 220 GSM. Now I'm going to be giving you the UK grams per square metre, which is the way of categorising the weights of cardstock in the UK. But if you work in pounds, I will try my best to give you the equivalent of that. So I'm looking at around about 220 GSM for this cardstock. This one is more like 170, 180. So for these, we're probably looking at around about £85 for this one, maybe £90 for this one. Now, if I want to do my card bases, I am really ideally needing something that is 250 GSM or more. So you do want to go with a heavyweight cardstock. Sometimes this can be called construction cardstock. So we're looking at even thicker than this one. If you're wanting to do things like mats and layers as well, so they are your panels on your card, I would also suggest going for a heavyweight card, or at least 220 GSM. Now, if you are looking at die cutting, this is where it gets a little more difficult, because you don't want to go too lightweight so that your die cut is flimsy, but you don't want to go so heavy that you can't get through the cardstock. This is where something like this weight, so I'd say around about 170 up to around about 250 GSM is perfect. Anything above 250 GSM likely just will not cut through, or certainly an intricate die won't. Now, if you are looking at stamping, the beauty of this is that you don't need to worry about the weight so much. So stamping can be done on pretty much any weight of cardstock, but this then brings me to looking at the texture of your cardstock instead. Now, really, we can categorise our cardstock into three different textures. So we could have smooth, we could have textured, or we could have glossy. So obviously glossy is at the other end of the scale to textured. It is kind of your super smooth, has a shiny appearance. Generally textured will have a matte appearance. So if we look at textured first of all, I don't know how well you can see this. This has kind of a woven linen texture to it. So it's really pretty, particularly if you are having elements of plain cardstock on your card or on your project. It gives it a little bit of interest. This is really pretty when it's inked because it picks out the texture, but that might not be the look you are going for. If you want to have perfectly smooth inking, if you want a nice smooth finish to your cardstock, then a smooth cardstock is ideal. And there are lots of these about. In general, unless your cardstock says that it's textured, you'd assume that it has a smooth surface. Now, when it comes to glossy, this one is a perfect example. This is a hunky-dory, adorable scoreable, where it's one-sided, so the colour is only on one side, but you can see the shine that you get. This is extremely smooth. Now, when it comes to creating your card bases, again, we're going to look at the weight rather than the texture. When it comes to mats and layers, the same goes again. When it comes to die cutting, personally, I have found that die cutting a textured cardstock is easier than die cutting a smooth cardstock. When it comes to stamping, this is where we really need to take notice of the finish on our cardstock, because if you're stamping onto a textured cardstock, you're going to have lots of interference in your image, so your ink won't touch all the surface of the cardstock, and you will see that in the finished stamped image. Stamping onto smooth cardstock is absolutely perfect. This is what we want from our cardstock, is nice smooth surface to stamp onto, and you will find many cardstocks call themselves stamping cardstock, and that just means they are super smooth. Stamping onto a glossy finish cardstock isn't ideal at all unless you have the appropriate ink. What I've found in the past is that your stamp will sometimes move around on the surface as you're applying pressure, giving you a less than perfect finish. Also, you need to be extremely careful about the ink you're choosing, because not all inks will set or dry on a shiny surface. Now, colour, needless to say, there is every colour imaginable in cardstock and paper choices, but there are two ways of adding colour to the cardstock during the process, and this will affect how you can work with that cardstock. So most commonly we would find that we have what we call a solid core cardstock. Now, a solid core cardstock means that the fibres are actually dyed as such. When the paper is made, that colour runs all the way through the cardstock there. Another alternative is to create cardstock, and in my opinion, this is usually a lower quality cardstock, but the ink or the colour is actually printed onto the paper or cardstock later on. This means that the centre of the cardstock is remaining white. So when we tear this, we can see we have that white finish on the inside. This means that if you are die cutting this type of cardstock, you are likely to see a slight white edge around the edges of your die cut. If you are embossing and you get a little bit of cracking or stretching of the card fibres, you may also see that white through too. However, a white core cardstock can create some really fun effects if you want to do this purposefully. Now, specialty cardstocks are more often used for mats and layers or for card bases. This is because the surface of them isn't ideal for die cutting or stamping on, but you can still get some fabulous looks and effects, especially when you're doing things like pressure embossing. One of the most commonly used ones, and most people will find this in the craft room, is craft cardstock. Kind of a recycled material that gives a really natural feel. You can get this in quite textured and quite smooth, and different thicknesses as well. Then we have mirror card. Now, this could be mirror, M-I-R-R-O-R card, or mirri card, M-I-R-R-I card, or you could just say it's satin, it's glossy, it's shiny, it's metallic. There's lots of names for it on different websites and under different brands, but essentially anything that looks like it's metal like this. As you can see, usually single-sided cardstock on the reverse. This, depending on the weight of it, can also be die cut, but stamping on it, much like the glossy cardstock, isn't ideal. Pearlescent cardstock is a really beautiful cardstock with a luxury finish. As you can see, you get the pearlescent effect there, so shining off the surface, but not a glossy shine as you would have with the mirror card. With pearlescent cardstock, this is very often used for things like wedding invitations. But again, die cutting is absolutely fine as long as you're picking the correct weight of cardstock, as discussed in the beginning. But if you're wanting to stamp onto this surface, you'll need to make sure you're using the correct inks again, because it will again take a little longer to dry. This is because when you get something that's particularly smooth, like pearlescent cardstock, The fibres are compacted together so tightly, it doesn't actually allow ink to soak into the surface. Another common material found within the cardstock range is glitter card. Available in every type of colour imaginable, glitter card can be of two sorts. It can be shed or no shed. So with these ones, which is the ones I purchase if I possibly can, are the no shed ones, which means the glitter doesn't come off on my hands. It's actually encapsulated into the cardstock. You can get glitter card with really fine glitter or with bigger chunks. Usually the bigger chunk glitter will shed a little bit. They can die cut. There is a common misconception that glitter card will blunt your dies. I've never found this to be an issue. Again, assuming you are choosing the correct weight of glitter cardstock, you should be able to die cut, heat emboss, pressure emboss, even stamp on with the correct inks. Another material that I feel falls under the cardstock category is acetate. This again comes in different weights, so this one is really quite thick and quite sturdy. This is your general acetate. This is 12 by 12 sheets. You can also buy a 4 sheet and even smaller. This one is heat resistant. You can get this from many different brands. Heat resistant just means you can apply heat to it and it will not shrink or warp. This one is not heat resistant. This is what I would be using for things like shaker cards, for example, or creating fun windows and apertures inside my cards. Because of the thickness of this one and how strong it is, I could also create really fun see-through card bases with this one too. However, this one is much thinner. As you can see, there's no way that would hold up as a card base on its own. It just doesn't have the strength, but it's really nice to use to cut up and have things like heat embossed sentiments on. The last and final thing to consider when thinking about cardstock for your papercraft projects is storage. Now, I love the Lasersmith MDF storage that we have at CraftStash, but there's lots of other alternatives as well. Ideally, you want to find a way of storing your cardstock so that the edges are not buckled or dog-eared, as we call it. They can lay perfectly flat out, and ideally so you have enough sections to be able to divide your cardstock into colour groups as well. So thank you for joining me, everybody. Don't forget, of course, to make sure you check out this playlist and subscribe to the CraftStash YouTube channel so that you don't miss any of our other tips, tricks and tutorials.